Sex, power, riches, and materialism are often presented to us as the ultimate measures of success and influence in this world. They appear to be the very forces that determine who rises and who falls, who is celebrated and who is forgotten. If someone accumulates wealth, if they hold authority over others, if they have material possessions that others desire, or if they attract attention through sex appeal and charm, society tends to place them on a pedestal. But the truth, if we are willing to look deeper, is that these forces are nothing more than tools. They do not control life, they only appear to do so. What truly controls life is the mind, and how that mind chooses to perceive, direct, and channel the energy behind these forces. Think about it. A person who is rich but lacks mental discipline will eventually squander their fortune, living in fear that it could all be taken away. A man or woman who holds power but is enslaved by their ego is constantly threatened by the idea of losing influence, and so they live in anxiety, manipulation, and paranoia. The individual who uses sex as a means of control may gain temporary gratification or even dominance, but deep within, they are still insecure, still unfulfilled, because the outward display of attraction cannot replace the inward awareness of who they truly are. And the one who clings to material possessions as if they define their identity may find that no matter how much they acquire, it never feels like enough. The illusion of control is the real danger here. These external elements create the appearance of authority, strength, and fulfillment. But appearances can deceive. They lure the mind into thinking, if I just get more money, I'll finally be secure. If I gain more power, I'll finally be respected. If I can own more possessions, I'll finally prove my worth. If I can attract more people, I'll finally feel complete. Yet the cycle never ends, because the control is misplaced. The mind becomes conditioned to look outward for strength, when the only lasting control is found inward, in the ability to govern thought, direct emotion, and discipline desire. Consider history. Empires rose and fell not because of their wealth, but because of how they managed it. Leaders were remembered not because of their power alone, but because of how they exercised it. Countless individuals inherited fortunes and yet lost them, because they lacked the mental capacity to handle abundance. At the same time, others who began with nothing created massive wealth because they understood that riches are the effect, not the cause. The cause is always the mind, its clarity, its vision, its alignment with purpose. Sex, when misunderstood, becomes destructive. It creates chaos, broken relationships, and addictions. But when understood as creative energy, it becomes a driving force behind innovation, passion, and even spiritual growth. Power, when misunderstood, corrupts and enslaves. But when understood as influence born from service, it uplifts nations and transforms societies. Riches, when misunderstood, become chains that bind a person to endless desire. But when understood as a resource for expansion and contribution, they become a blessing not only to the one who holds them, but to countless others. Materialism, when misunderstood, traps the individual in comparison, envy, and emptiness. But when understood as a temporary expression of abundance, it becomes a reminder that life can be enjoyed without being enslaved by possessions. All of this points back to one thing. The mind is the true master. Without mental mastery, sex becomes lust, power becomes tyranny, riches become greed, and materialism becomes emptiness. With mental mastery, sex becomes creative, power becomes purposeful, riches become expansive, and materialism becomes irrelevant, because fulfillment is already present within. The difference lies not in the external conditions, but in the internal awareness that governs them. The greatest error people make is confusing possession with control. Owning something does not mean you control it. You may own a luxury car, but if your identity is tied to that car, then the car owns you. You may have millions in the bank, but if your mind is filled with fear of losing it, then money controls you. You may hold a position of influence, but if your thoughts are consumed by what others think of you, then public opinion controls you. The surface suggests control, but the reality reveals bondage. The true measure of control is not what you possess externally, but what you can master internally. Every human being has access to the same mind power. The question is not whether you have the ability to control life, but whether you are willing to discipline the mind enough to rise above illusion. The mind, when awakened, recognizes that sex, power, riches, and materialism are temporary forces. They are not to be feared, nor worshipped, nor avoided. They are to be understood. They are to be directed. They are to be mastered, because mastery of them does not come from running after them, but from standing above them, knowing that they are expressions of energy, not definitions of worth. When you understand this, everything changes. You no longer chase possessions to feel whole. You no longer pursue power to feel strong. You no longer cling to relationships to feel validated. You no longer depend on materialism to feel significant. Instead, you see them for what they are: tools to be used wisely, expressions of energy that can serve your purpose when you control them through the power of your own awareness. And the higher the awareness, the greater the mastery over these illusions that once seemed so powerful. When we look at the forces of sex, power, riches, and materialism, one of the greatest challenges is not their existence, but the excess to which human beings are drawn. It is not sex itself that destroys. It is the obsession with it. It is not power that corrupts. It is the addiction to control and domination. It is not money that brings despair. It is the insatiable hunger for more, without ever pausing to ask why. It is not material possession that causes emptiness. It is the dependence upon it for identity and security. Excess turns what could be a tool into a trap. And the trap is subtle, because in the beginning it looks like pleasure, success, and achievement. But as time passes, it reveals itself as slavery. Human desire, if left undisciplined, has no end. It stretches further and further, demanding more. A person might achieve financial success, and instead of feeling satisfied, they feel an even stronger craving for the next level, the next deal, the next luxury. Someone may taste power, and instead of using it responsibly, they thirst for greater control, willing to manipulate or even destroy in order to keep what they have. Another may indulge in the pleasures of the flesh, but instead of using that energy to create, to connect, to love, they spiral into addiction, where the appetite never rests. This is the danger of excess. It convinces the mind that fulfillment is only one more step away, one more possession away, one more conquest away, when in reality fulfillment is not found in accumulation, but in alignment. The human mind is wired to seek expansion, and this in itself is not wrong. Expansion is natural. We are meant to grow, to evolve, to create more than we had before. But excess is when growth becomes distortion. It is when the drive to expand is disconnected from higher purpose and becomes an endless chase after illusions. What begins as ambition soon morphs into obsession. What begins as a tool for life becomes the master of life. Excess is like a fire that escapes its boundaries. What was once useful and warming becomes destructive and consuming. History has shown us countless examples of individuals who gained the world but lost themselves. Leaders who rose to great heights of influence but could not stop hungering for more power eventually destroyed their own empires. Wealthy individuals who had enough to live comfortably for generations still sought to squeeze more profit, more status, more recognition, and in the end were crushed under the weight of their greed. Even entire societies that built their foundations on materialism and excess eventually collapsed under the burden of their own appetite, because when there is no balance, the system cannot sustain itself. The trap of excess is always the same. It offers freedom, but delivers bondage. It is important to see that excess begins in the mind long before it appears in the physical. A person first feeds the thought that, "I need more in order to be more." That thought grows into belief. The belief creates obsession, and the obsession creates behavior. Soon the individual is no longer directing their desires, but their desires are directing them. They become enslaved to the very thing they believed would liberate them. The material possessions they once dreamed of now control their emotions. The wealth they longed for now dictates their every thought. The sexual appetite they indulged has become a prison of dependency. The power they sought has become a chain around their neck, requiring constant vigilance, manipulation, and fear of loss. Excess always turns the master into the servant. What makes the trap even more dangerous is its ability to disguise itself as progress. A person may justify their greed by calling it ambition. They may justify their lust by calling it passion. They may justify their hunger for domination by calling it leadership. They may justify their materialism by calling it success. And because society often celebrates external results, many fall into the same illusion, believing that what appears as advancement is actually achievement. But if the mind is restless, if peace is absent, if fulfillment never arrives, then all that has been gained externally is only masking the emptiness that exists internally. The trap of excess has no finish line. It keeps the individual running in circles, always reaching for the next level, but never arriving. The more they gain, the less satisfied they feel, because satisfaction was never in the thing itself. It was always in the mind's ability to govern its relationship to the thing. Without awareness, without discipline, without higher vision, desire will always expand beyond control, and what could have been a servant becomes a master. What could have been a blessing becomes a curse. When sex is balanced, it inspires connection, intimacy, and creativity. But when it becomes excess, it breeds addiction, disconnection, and emptiness. When power is balanced, it creates order, influence, and leadership. But when it becomes excess, it creates corruption, manipulation, and destruction. When riches are balanced, they provide security, opportunity, and contribution. But when they become excess, they create greed, anxiety, and isolation. When materialism is balanced, it allows for comfort and enjoyment. But when it becomes excess, it produces emptiness, comparison, and envy. Excess transforms the gift into a poison, and only awareness can draw the line between use and abuse. The trap is not in the object itself. It is in the relationship the mind builds with it. That is why two people can hold the same amount of wealth, yet one feels abundant while the other feels poor. Two people can hold influence, yet one uses it with integrity while the other uses it for destruction. Two people can have possessions, yet one enjoys them freely, while the other clings to them desperately. The difference is never in the external. It is always in the internal. When excess rules, the person is enslaved. When discipline rules, the person is free. Desire has always been the spark that moves humanity forward. Every invention, every creation, every achievement begins with a desire. At its core, sex, power, and riches are not separate entities. They are forms of energy, channels of desire that carry with them incredible potential. Sexual energy is not just about physical expression. It is the raw creative force of life itself, the same energy that brings new life into the world and fuels the imagination to birth new ideas, new art, new ventures. The desire for power is not inherently negative. It is the drive to influence, to direct, to shape the course of events, and when channeled correctly, it becomes leadership, vision, and authority rooted in responsibility. The hunger for riches is also not evil. It is the expression of expansion, the drive to create more, to improve conditions, to multiply resources. At the deepest level, all of these desires are different faces of the same energy, and it is the direction of that energy that determines whether it builds or destroys. The human being is a vessel of energy. Most people never stop to realize that every thought, every emotion, every urge is a form of power. When a person is drawn to sex, what they are truly experiencing is not simply lust, but the stirring of creative energy within them. When they desire power, what they are reaching for is the ability to expand their influence. When they long for riches, what they are really expressing is the soul's desire to grow beyond its current limitations. These energies are neutral until the mind gives them meaning, until thought directs them toward either construction or destruction. The tragedy is that most individuals allow the energy of desire to scatter aimlessly, chasing temporary gratification rather than channeling it toward creation. Sexual energy, when left undisciplined, becomes lust that burns through relationships and destroys self-respect. But when harnessed, when transmuted into creative action, it becomes a source of genius. Many of the world's greatest thinkers, artists, inventors, and leaders have understood, even if only intuitively, that their creative breakthroughs came from a sublimated energy, an energy originally sexual in nature that they redirected toward their purpose. The same passion that can consume the body can also fuel the mind to achieve extraordinary things. This is why those who learn to master sexual energy, rather than being mastered by it, often stand out in history as people of unusual influence and creativity. Power, too, is a form of desire that reflects this same principle. The individual who craves power without wisdom falls into domination, manipulation, and destruction. Yet the person who channels the desire for power into service, leadership, and vision becomes a force for transformation. Power is only dangerous when it is sought for selfish ends. When pursued as a tool to guide, to lift, and to direct energy for the good of others, it becomes noble and necessary. The hunger for power is often misunderstood as greed, but in its highest form, it is simply the desire to manifest greater responsibility and greater capacity to influence the direction of life. The same desire that can create a tyrant can also create a liberator, and the difference lies only in the intention that guides it. The desire for riches follows the same law. Riches are not just about money in the bank or possessions in hand. Riches represent the abundance of life itself, the capacity to multiply and expand. When someone seeks riches purely for material gain, the energy collapses in on itself. leading to greed and emptiness. But when someone seeks riches as a means to create, to expand opportunities, to contribute to others, the energy multiplies outward, benefiting not only the individual but all who are touched by their abundance. Money itself has no morality. It simply amplifies the consciousness of the one who holds it. A person who is small-minded will use money to serve their fears, while a person who has vision will use money to serve their purpose. The desire for riches, therefore, can either enslave or liberate depending on whether the mind directs it toward selfishness or contribution. When we look at these energies collectively, sex, power, riches, we begin to see that they are not enemies of the spirit, but raw materials waiting to be shaped. The sculptor sees a block of marble not as a burden, but as potential. In the same way, desire is not a weakness, but a tool. It is the energy of creation, and it is given to every human being. The tragedy is not that people desire too much, but that they often desire without direction. They allow the energy to consume them, instead of channeling it into something greater than themselves. Desire without direction is chaos. Desire with direction is creation. What makes the energy of desire so potent is its ability to awaken the human mind. When a person is consumed by desire, they can accomplish things they never imagined. They stay up longer, they think deeper, they persist where others quit. The secret is not to extinguish desire but to elevate it, to align it with higher vision. Sexual energy, when elevated, becomes creativity. The thirst for power, when elevated, becomes leadership. The hunger for riches, when elevated, becomes abundance for all. This is the alchemy of the human mind. It can take raw, primal desire and transmute it into something magnificent. The danger lies not in the presence of desire, but in the misunderstanding of it. Many people are taught to suppress desire, to see it as evil, and so it festers in the subconscious, emerging in destructive ways. Others are taught to indulge it without question, and so they drown in their appetites, never finding peace. The truth lies in neither suppression nor indulgence, but in mastery. Mastery is the ability to take the energy of desire and point it toward a worthy ideal, to let it serve a vision that is bigger than gratification. This is where greatness is born. This is where individuals rise above the ordinary and tap into extraordinary reservoirs of power. Every human being has this energy within them. It is not reserved for a chosen few. The difference between those who leave a mark on the world and those who are consumed by it is simply the direction in which they point their desires. The energy is the same. The result is determined by the mind that governs it. Riches are often thought of in narrow terms, as though they can only be measured in numbers, bank accounts, or physical possessions. People speak of riches as if they exist solely in gold, jewels, businesses, or real estate, and because of this, so many limit themselves to a shallow understanding of wealth. True riches, however, extend far beyond material accumulation. They include awareness, wisdom, fulfillment, creativity, love, and the ability to contribute meaningfully to others. Riches are not confined to the external world. They are an internal state that spills outward. Money, possessions, and influence may amplify what already exists, but the essence of riches is always rooted in consciousness. If money were the true measure of wealth, then every wealthy person would live in peace, happiness, and security. Yet history and modern society alike are filled with countless examples of people who amassed enormous fortunes yet lived in turmoil, anxiety, and even despair. Riches in the external sense cannot buy the deeper dimensions of life, because peace of mind, inner fulfillment, and a sense of purpose are not for sale. A person can fill their home with luxuries, but if their mind is tormented, the mansion becomes nothing more than a prison. They can travel the world, dine at the finest tables, and wear the most expensive clothes. But if they are not at peace with themselves, the experience feels empty. This shows clearly that true riches are not in what is owned, but in what is experienced internally. Awareness is a form of wealth many overlook. The individual who is aware, who sees life with clarity, who understands themselves and others, carries riches beyond anything material. Awareness allows a person to navigate life with wisdom, to respond instead of react, to rise above illusions and see truth where others only see appearances. Awareness opens the mind to possibilities that the unaware miss, and in that awareness lies opportunity. Two people can be given the same situation. One will see limitation, while the other will see possibility. The one with awareness is rich, not because of what they hold in their hand, but because of the vision that guides them forward. Wisdom is another form of riches. Knowledge can be acquired, but wisdom is applied understanding. A person with wisdom can take a small resource and multiply it, while another with no wisdom can take abundance and waste it. Wisdom is what governs the use of all other riches. Without it, money becomes destructive, power becomes dangerous, and materialism becomes hollow. With it, even modest means can be turned into extraordinary impact. Wisdom enriches life because it aligns decisions with truth, and every choice made from truth creates more abundance, more opportunity, and more fulfillment. Contribution is also a dimension of true riches. What good is wealth that only serves the self? Riches become meaningful when they expand beyond one's own needs and flow outward into the lives of others. A person may hold millions, but if they hoard it in fear, their life remains small. Another may have less materially, but use what they have to uplift, inspire, and support others, and in doing so they create ripples of impact that make them truly wealthy. Contribution multiplies wealth because it aligns with the principle of circulation. What you give flows back to you in ways greater than what you released. The richest people in the deepest sense are not those who have accumulated the most, but those who have given the most meaningfully. Creativity is also a form of riches. The ability to bring new ideas into existence, to imagine possibilities that others cannot see, is a treasure greater than gold. A creative mind can turn nothing into something, and that is the very essence of wealth. Many of the greatest fortunes in history were not inherited, but created from vision, innovation, and imagination. Creativity transforms limitations into opportunities, and it ensures that a person can generate abundance regardless of their starting point. The creative mind is never truly poor because it holds within itself an infinite source of wealth. Love and relationships, too, are a dimension of riches that cannot be measured in material terms. To be surrounded by people who care, to share authentic connections, to experience intimacy, trust, and companionship. These are riches that money cannot replicate. A person with millions who lives in isolation is impoverished in the deepest sense, while another who has little materially, but is surrounded by love is rich beyond measure. Human beings are wired for connection, and those connections form a wealth that transcends possessions. Money, when it does enter the picture, should never be misunderstood. Money is not wealth in itself, it is a tool, a symbol of exchange. It amplifies what already exists in the consciousness of the person who holds it. If they are insecure, money amplifies their fear. If they are greedy, money amplifies their greed. If they are generous, money amplifies their generosity. If they are purposeful, money amplifies their impact. That is why some individuals use money to build empires of destruction, while others use the same resource to build schools, hospitals, and movements that uplift humanity. Money itself is neutral. It is the consciousness behind it that determines whether it becomes a blessing or a curse. True wealth, then, is a state of being before it is a state of having. It begins within, in the awareness of one's own creative power, in the wisdom to use energy rightly, in the fulfillment of authentic connections, in the joy of contribution, and in the freedom of a mind at peace. When this inner foundation is strong, external riches naturally follow, and when they do, they are enjoyed without attachment or fear. External riches become expressions of inner wealth, not substitutes for it. A person who is rich within can lose material possessions and still remain abundant because their true wealth cannot be taken away. Materialism is one of the most misunderstood pursuits in human life. People chase after material objects, cars, clothes, jewelry, houses, gadgets, believing these things will fill the emptiness inside them. The advertising industry thrives on this illusion, whispering to the masses that the next purchase will finally make them happy, that the next possession will bring lasting satisfaction, that the next upgrade will fix the gnawing sense of lack. Yet, time after time, once the thrill of the purchase fades, the emptiness returns, and the cycle begins again. The person convinces themselves that perhaps they just need more, or better, or newer, and so they continue to chase what was never meant to provide fulfillment in the first place. The human spirit is wired for growth, meaning, and contribution, but materialism diverts that natural drive into a shallow loop of acquisition. Material objects are not evil in themselves. They can be enjoyed, appreciated, and even celebrated. But when a person leans on them to define identity or provide happiness, they discover a hollowness that no object can fill. A luxury car may provide comfort and pride for a while, but once the novelty wears off, it becomes just another vehicle. A new phone may feel exciting at first, but a few months later, it feels outdated, replaced by a newer model. This endless treadmill is what keeps people trapped in the illusion that material possessions equal fulfillment, when in truth they only offer temporary stimulation. The difference between materialism and fulfillment lies in alignment. Fulfillment comes from living a life in harmony with one's deepest values, from growth, love, creativity, and service. Materialism, by contrast, is the attempt to bypass the inner work of fulfillment by substituting it with external symbols of success. A person who pursues materialism does not truly want the object itself. They want what they believe the object will give them: status, respect, admiration, or a sense of worth. Yet once the object is obtained, the deeper need remains unmet, because worth cannot be purchased, respect cannot be bought, and significance cannot be owned. Consider how fragile materialism is. If someone builds their identity around possessions, what happens when those possessions are taken away? If their self-esteem comes from the clothes they wear, what happens when fashion changes? If their confidence comes from the car they drive, what happens when the car breaks down? A life built on materialism is a life built on sand, because possessions are temporary, always changing, and never guaranteed. True fulfillment, on the other hand, is unshakable because it is built on qualities that cannot be taken away. Wisdom, awareness, love, creativity, and purpose. The pursuit of materialism also creates comparison and competition, because material value is always relative. A person may feel rich when they have more than their neighbor, but as soon as they meet someone with greater possessions, they feel poor again. This comparison trap ensures that materialism can never lead to peace. It breeds envy, jealousy, and insecurity, because there will always be someone with more. Fulfillment is free of this trap because it does not depend on comparison. It is internal, personal, and unique. A person who is fulfilled celebrates the success of others rather than feeling threatened by it, because their sense of worth does not depend on being ahead in a race that never ends. Another danger of materialism is the way it distracts the mind from true growth. When the mind is consumed by buying, owning, and displaying possessions, it has little space left for self-reflection, creativity, or meaningful connection. Materialism narrows focus to the surface level of life, blinding a person to deeper truths. Fulfillment, in contrast, expands awareness. It opens the mind to questions of purpose, contribution, and legacy. While materialism asks, "What can I get for myself?" fulfillment asks, "What can I create, who can I become, and how can I serve?" The first shrinks the soul, while the second expands it. Materialism is seductive because it is visible. People can see the house, the car, the clothes, and so they assume that success must look like these things. Fulfillment, however, is invisible. It is an inner state of peace, joy, and purpose. You cannot take a photograph of fulfillment, but you can feel its presence in the way a person carries themselves, in their calmness, their confidence, their authenticity. Fulfillment radiates from within, while materialism is always displayed from without. One is rooted in being, the other in appearing. This is why people who achieve great material success often report feeling empty if they have neglected inner fulfillment. They climbed the ladder of success only to find it leaning against the wrong wall. They sacrificed time, relationships, health, and peace of mind for possessions only to discover that possessions could not replace what was lost. On the other hand, those who pursue fulfillment first often find that material abundance flows naturally as a byproduct, because when a person lives with purpose, creativity, and service, opportunities for external success multiply. The key difference is that, for the fulfilled person, material abundance is enjoyed but not worshipped, used but not depended upon, appreciated but not clung to. Materialism thrives on the illusion of scarcity, convincing people that they are incomplete and must buy their way into wholeness. Fulfillment thrives on the truth of abundance, recognizing that wholeness is already present within, and that external possessions are merely extensions of that inner wealth. When a person realizes this, they break free from the cycle of consumption and begin to use possessions for enjoyment rather than identity. A car becomes transportation, not a symbol of status. A house becomes shelter and comfort, not a trophy of worth. Clothes become expressions of personality, not the definition of value. In this freedom, possessions no longer possess the person, and material objects take their rightful place as tools rather than masters. Fulfillment requires awareness, intention, and discipline. It asks the individual to look beyond the surface, to question their motives, to discover what truly brings them alive. It requires courage to step off the treadmill of endless consumption and choose a path that may not always be celebrated by society, but which leads to authentic joy. Materialism requires no such courage. It is the default path, easy to follow, easy to imitate, but ultimately empty. The difference is profound. Materialism leaves a person chasing shadows, while fulfillment allows them to live in light. Sex, power, riches, and materialism are not enemies to be feared, nor are they idols to be worshipped. They are energies, forces, and tools that human beings encounter in the process of living. And the true challenge lies not in rejecting them, but in mastering them. Many people think the path to freedom is to deny these things, to turn away from desire, to avoid wealth, to shun power, or to condemn material possessions. But denial does not create mastery, it only creates repression. Repression leaves the energy untransformed, hidden in the subconscious where it festers, waiting for an opportunity to erupt. True mastery comes not from rejection, but from transcendence, from rising above the lower use of these forces and learning to direct them with wisdom, purpose, and awareness. Sex is one of the most powerful energies in existence. It has the potential to create life, to bond people, to generate intimacy and passion, but when misused, it leads to lust, addiction, and exploitation. Denying sexual energy does not eliminate it. It only forces it underground, where it can express itself in distorted ways. Mastery, on the other hand, recognizes the sacredness of this energy. It sees sex as more than physical gratification, as a creative current that can be directed toward art, innovation, love, and spiritual growth. A person who learns to master sexual energy does not become enslaved by their desires, nor do they suppress them. Instead, they channel that energy into higher expression, into building rather than consuming, into connection rather than escape. Power, too, is often feared because of the destruction it has caused in the hands of the corrupt. History is filled with examples of leaders who abused their influence, who allowed ambition to spiral into tyranny. But power itself is neutral. It is the intention behind it that defines its impact. To reject power is to reject responsibility, because every human being carries influence, whether over their family, their community, or larger circles. Mastery of power means using it not for domination, but for service, not for control, but for guidance. A person who has transcended the ego's hunger for power understands that real authority is not taken by force, but earned through integrity, vision, and contribution. They do not fear power, nor are they seduced by it. They wield it as a tool to create order, inspire growth, and lead with wisdom. Riches, in the same way, are often misunderstood. People are taught that money is the root of corruption, that wealth leads only to greed and destruction. But wealth in itself has no morality. It is a magnifier. It expands whatever consciousness is present. In the hands of the selfish, it becomes greed. In the hands of the wise, it becomes opportunity creation and contribution. To deny riches is to deny one's capacity to expand and to circulate abundance. Mastery of riches means no longer being owned by money, no longer attaching one's worth to numbers or possessions, but rather using money as a resource to amplify creativity, to provide freedom, and to support higher purposes. A person who has transcended the material obsession with wealth understands that money is a servant, not a master, and they use it accordingly. Materialism is perhaps the most deceptive of these forces because it masquerades as success. It is easy to believe that accumulation of possessions equals progress, yet possessions without purpose quickly become empty. Rejecting material things altogether, however, is not the answer either, Because the world we live in requires tools, comfort, and resources. True mastery of materialism means enjoying possessions without being enslaved by them, appreciating comfort without clinging to it, and seeing objects as temporary expressions of abundance rather than permanent symbols of worth. The one who transcends materialism does not need to flaunt possessions to feel valuable, nor do they need to renounce them to prove spiritual strength. They walk freely in the middle, owning things but never being owned by them. Transcendence of these forces requires awareness, discipline, and vision. Awareness allows a person to see through illusions, to recognize when desire has shifted into obsession, when possession has turned into attachment, when influence has drifted into control. Discipline provides the ability to govern impulses, to redirect energy instead of being consumed by it, to hold authority over the self before attempting to hold authority over the world. Vision gives the higher direction, the purpose that channels these raw forces into something meaningful, something that uplifts rather than diminishes. Without vision, sex becomes mere indulgence, power becomes corruption, riches become greed, and materialism becomes emptiness. With vision, sex becomes creativity, power becomes leadership, riches become abundance, and materialism becomes expression. This is the higher calling, not to run from the energies that shape human experience, but to rise above their lower expressions and use them as instruments for growth. The person who rejects them lives in fear. The one who indulges them lives in bondage, but the one who masters them lives in freedom. Mastery means being able to enjoy without being dependent, to use without being used, to lead without being corrupted, to create without being consumed. It is the balance that comes when the mind governs desire instead of being governed by it. Every human being encounters these forces in some form. They cannot be avoided because they are part of the fabric of existence. But they can be transformed. They can be lifted from tools of enslavement into tools of empowerment. The difference lies in whether a person sees them as ends in themselves or as means to something greater. Sex, power, riches, and materialism are not the destination. They are vehicles, energies, instruments. When elevated, they become channels through which the human spirit expresses its highest potential. When left unchecked, they become prisons. The choice is always present, to be mastered by them or to master them, to serve them or to let them serve you. Transcendence is not about rejecting life's forces, but about standing above them, understanding them, and channeling them toward purpose that is greater than self.